I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things, a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!
Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus, and hello to everyone in Bowling Green or listening on the internet, wherever or whenever you may be. My name is Joseph D. DeMare, and I'm here with my Cenophilist co-host,
Rebecca Wood. You're calling me stuff I gotta look up.
Cenophilist, yes.
Yeah. I
Dog
like
lover.
things from outer space?
Dog lover.
Oh, okay, sorry.
You
I
tell-
was,
you
know,
You tell her.
Cenophilist is dog lover.
Good to know.
Over the next hour, Rebecca and I will take you around the world and under the sea through our incredible radio program called For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment, and we talk about them in the ways that they affect you, your wealth, your health, your happiness, and the wealth and health and happiness of your friends and family, and the health and happiness of all the creatures of the earth, including the endangered white millipede in California with 750 legs, the centipedes that can have up to 354, the symphylans with just 24 legs, the caterpillars that could have 16, the arachnids with their 8, the insects with their 6, the many animals with 4 legs, we humans and the rest of the two-legged critters. But we also can't forget the gastropods with their single foot, and of course all those living things with no legs at all. Because no matter how many legs one has, there's no running away from the planet we all share, called Earth. For the next 15 minutes, we're just going to have a little chat about some of our ecological observations for the week, and then we have an excellent interview with Miss Emma Wilson, who spoke to us from England, where she is the policy director for an excellent organization called the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition. She'll be talking to us about the urgent threat to our oceans to stop the plans for deep sea mining. After that interview comes messages from our incredible sponsors and patrons. Then it'll be time for Rebecca to take an in-depth look at her own topic. Rebecca, what will you be talking about this week?
The soon-to-be formerly known forest was once Wayne.
Close to home in Northwest Ohio.
Southeast. I think.
Southeast.
Yeah.
Southeast Ohio.
But if you've been down to Athens, just passing through, you probably drove through it.
All right, can't wait to hear about that. After we hear from Rebecca, we have some ecological news from around the world, an interesting assortment of stories this week. We have a hopeful story, one that's literally catastrophic, and another about radioactive hogs. But first, we've been trying to keep you updated about the Canadian wildfires, because unlike the mainstream media, we don't just drop stories because it's not convenient to report on it anymore. If we think it's important here at For a Green Future, we'll keep covering it. So Canada last updated its National Wildlands Fire Report back on August 30th. At that time, there were 640 fires burning, with 255 of them out of control. Those figures say that the situation continues to deteriorate. That's 30 more out of control fires than there were just 2 weeks before. About 250,000 people have been forced to relocate. There have been 6 confirmed deaths so far. Almost 15 and a quarter million hectares have burned so far. That's an area just about the size of the state of Georgia.
She whiz.
About 6 times the area for a normal fire season. The Canadian wildfires are just one of many dire consequences of global warming that we environmentalists have been predicting for a long time. It's a very strange time to be an environmentalist. We can honestly say, we told you so, because exactly what we have been predicting for decades, that being increased fires, increased floods, increased droughts, melting ice sheets, and a dying biosphere, all this has been happening exactly as we predicted years ago. The only difference is it's happening even faster than the scientists predicted. But we know that's because of what, Rebecca?
Positive feedback loop.
That's right. The original host of this program.
I just wake up at like sometimes 2 a.m. and shout that now for no reason.
That's part of the loop.
Yeah.
The original host of this program, who continues to remain nameless, had a similar show that aired in Buffalo in the early 2000s. He was saying these kinds of events, and this positive feedback loop was going more than 20 years ago. Of course, as we know, in the present, very few people listened back then. The problem is, as the song says, they're not listening still. I don't know the song.
Is this Elton John? Is it that song?
No.
No, it's the Starry Night.
Starry
Yeah,
Night,
okay.
Vincent.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah.
Starry Night, about Vincent Van Gogh. Who did that?
Don McLean.
Don McLean, okay.
Alright, so you could put that in there somehow. Alright,
Don McLean.
Don McLean. He's the guy.
Don McLean.
The problem is, as the song by Don McLean says, they're not listening still.
Perhaps they never will.
We, like 150 million other Americans, that drove our car for a road trip this past Labor Day weekend, seeing the turnpike packed with cars and trucks, bumper to bumper, both forward and back, Both forward and back was an awe-inspiring and continually depressing sight. The amount of CO2 we put into the air just this past weekend as a society, as a United States, was incredible. Of course, there are always some small signs of hope. There were definitely more Teslas and other electric cars and hybrids on the road than we've ever seen before. Figures say that new electric car sales in the US have passed the 5% tipping point. That's supported by the cars we observed on the road. There were newer brands of electric cars, like the Rivian pickup truck, an all-electric pickup truck that we saw on a car charger next to ours on part of the trip. We, of course, were driving our Chrysler Pacifica plug-in hybrid Wonder Van that got excellent mileage and didn't need to burn gas to keep the AC going in the traffic jams we were in. But we still had to burn gas. In addition to the 150 million who drove this weekend, 14 million flew. Overseas trips were up 88% from last year. Domestic flights were up 4%. Cruises were up 44%. We, as a society, are continuing to burn fossil fuels as if there were no tomorrow. The problem is there will be a tomorrow, and it will certainly be worse than today.
It's just a question of whether we will be here to witness it or not, essentially.
A large part of us won't be in
Yeah.
50 years. How much worse it all gets depends on how much more carbon we put into the air before we stop. And we will have to stop one way or another. One of the ways we've been trying to get the message through is through protests. People all over the planet have been protesting to continued inaction on global warming for decades now. We were privileged back in 2014 to participate in the People's Climate March in New York City. Over 400,000 people protested in that single event. It was awe-inspiring and heartening to see that many people gathered together in one place with one purpose in mind. The protest signs and messages were many, and the floats ranged from tiny and humorous to huge. One of the most memorable was a gigantic cow urging people to stop eating beef. Protests and civil disobedience of all kinds have continued ever since. In 2019, 6 million people participated in the global climate strike. That was organized by Fridays for Future, and it led to millions of people walking off the job or out of their schools. That was around the time Greta Thunberg.
Thunberg.
I think she says it Thunberg. Thunberg, yeah.
Greta Thunberg became a household name when she made her famous speech at the United Nations, blasting our political leaders for the inaction. Extinction Rebellion has organized hundreds of protests events worldwide, often blocking busy roads. And of course, other groups and other protesters, all who have been taking actions like blocking pipelines and trying to save old-growth forests. All of these groups list global warming as one of their main motivating factors. For all of these protests, and especially Extinction Rebellion, you have to remember that the inconvenience is the point here.
Yep, it's not an accident.
Yes, our entire planet is being threatened by the inaction of our society that we find ourselves in. And so you might hear bad things about these groups on the news, but it's all part of the point to get your anger directed not at them, the groups, but the society that's forcing them to take these forms of protests.
You know, I think this is a major part of how people are maintaining their denial about this, is that so many people just, dash from their house into their car and into their work and or a store, and that's it. That's their only contact with the outside.
Yes, and it's
so of course they can just be like, oh yeah, it seems really hot, Oh well, maybe it'll go away,
Yeah.
When you this is the thing why I can't, and me and many other people, because I have to walk around in this stuff,
Right, for some...
You notice it's unusual and unpleasant when you're walking around in it quite a bit.
For some people, it reassures them to have these groups, fighting for them so they can forget about it.
Yeah.
But then for other groups, it's easy for them to direct outrage at these same groups of people for reminding them of their troubles. Well, the reason we're reminiscing about protests is because there's another protest being called for this next week, Sunday, September 17th, again in New York City. Unfortunately, like 2014 and 2019, this one, even though it's being organized by hundreds of environmental and civic groups, and even though it already has thousands of volunteers who will work there and who are trying to promote it, this protest is being ignored by the mainstream media. The narrative that only the elites will survive the death of our planet is not the one they want the public to know. On the topic of media distribution, the Carnegie Endowment for Global Peace has actually created a climate protest tracker. It shows that over the past year, about 600,000 people have protested some aspect of global warming in over 20 countries around the world. The largest recently was the March 2023 Global Climate Strike, which had over 300,000 participants. The next biggest was a protest in France last October that had over 100,000. This New York City protest, coming up on September 17th, was initially called for by Jane Fonda, and many celebrities will also be in attendance. But it seems that just as so many global warming indicators are leaping off the charts, there has been a decision in the media to tone down global warming coverage. One trick the mainstream media uses to lessen the impact of protests, like the one coming up next week, is to not cover the event until after it's already in progress. That is, they give the general public no indication a huge protest is about to happen, even though hundreds of thousands of people descending on New York City is newsworthy. As a little inside joke, one sure way to get coverage from the mainstream media is to drop out of the race, so to speak.
Yeah.
The too little, too late model of media coverage is literally killing us. Frankly, global warming issues should have been front page news this entire summer, what with weeks of record high temperatures worldwide. Instead, we're being given wall-to-wall coverage of Trump's facial expressions. But
Which are horrifying and comical, and yet they never really change. He's really just got that one bestial thing.
It's not the time to focus on one person, though. This is still the time when all of us must work together to shut the carbon industry down completely. We also need to remember that these actions are having an impact. Demand for electric vehicles is higher than it's ever been. Clean energy sources like wind and solar are booming. Even though fossil fuel use has still been climbing, it's climbing much more slowly and may peak in 2024 and decline after that.
Your lips to God's ears.
We'd like to see some of you listeners attending these protests, or attending whatever protests you can. When you spend an entire day marching with hundreds of thousands of people protesting climate change, something good happens to your psyche. It becomes a little harder to simply forget all that when it's time to buy your next car or consider your next purchase. These protesters, these people that care about the environment enough to attend, they don't buy gas-guzzling SUVs. For these millions who've participated, trying to reduce their carbon footprint becomes an important part of every decision they make. Just as important, they care about the information, the science we're gathering every day about the state of our planet. They are paying attention even as the mainstream media looks away, and we'd like you to take that opportunity to learn for yourself as well. You can continue to count on us here at For a Green Future to give you the vital information that the mainstream media keeps trying to minimize or ignore. One of those stories is the growing threat, the upcoming threat of deep ocean mining. There are forces at work in capitals around the world trying to clear the way for mining the ocean floor. If they're allowed to go forward, they could literally destroy life in the seas. The UN Environment Program has already sounded the alarm on the mining of sand in shallow waters in oceans around the world. Sand mining pulls up billions of tons of the ocean floor every year. In some places, it's completely sterilized the region. That damage could be minor compared to the deep sea mining proposals, which would stir up sediments, dump toxic wastes back into the oceans, and destroy much of the life in the sea that would never recover. Happily, there's a growing international movement to ban deep sea mining before it gets going. We are privileged to have as our guest to this show Emma Wilson from the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition to tell us about the push to save the ocean from mining. Let's go to that interview now. Hello, welcome to For a Green Future. Could you tell us your name and position?
Hi, my name's Emma Wilson. I am an ocean campaigner. I work for an NGO called the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition.
So your group is dedicated to the conservation of the deep seas. Could you describe for us the area that you're protecting? I think a lot of people, when they think about the deep sea, imagine flat, lifeless wastelands. Do you think that mental picture is accurate?
It is not accurate at all. So there are some parts of the deep sea that are flat abyssal plains. They're certainly not lifeless, but I'll come back to that. But there are also other parts of the deep sea that have incredibly dramatic geological formations. We're talking underwater mountains, we're talking deep ravines, we're talking hydrothermal vents spewing out boiling hot water in an otherwise very cold environment. So there's a lot of geological variety for starters. Otherwise, as for the actual life that's down there, what's kind of interesting about the deep sea is that we're only just discovering, really. So I think for a very long time, we did think that it was this kind of desert-like environment, right, with nothing going on. But it's actually recently been classed by the UN as probably the world's most biodiverse region. So we're talking a greater richness of species diversity even than like the Amazon rainforest.
Right.
I mean, it's a fascinating place. There are life forms down there that you can't even imagine until you've seen them. There are some life forms that, by our standards, we would consider to be pretty monstrous. I think a lot of people have that kind of image in mind of, you know, the anglerfish with the big
Right.
mouth and the light hanging over its mouth to lure other fish in. But there's also a lot of beauty down there. There are a lot of creatures that use bioluminescence. Some organisms that just are so graceful and elegant, and yeah, as I said, kind of unlike anything that we can imagine. And I think another important thing to point out about the deep sea is that it plays a really important role in carbon storage. So, of course, in our current times of a climate crisis, the deep sea is really a key ally for sucking up that carbon and locking it away in the depths.
The deep oceans don't really have a constituency that is, no humans live there or will be directly affected by deep sea mining. Does that make protecting them more difficult?
It does, because of course it's always really hard to get people to care about non-human life. A lot of people have other priorities, of course, which is totally understandable. But I think it's really important for us to remember that even if humans don't live there, all of our lives are touched by this environment, right? Because everything is connected. So the deep ocean might be far away, but you know, it provides vital services for us on land. For example, it plays a key role in the very air that we breathe. It's commonly said that 3 out of every 4 breaths of oxygen that we take come straight from the ocean.
Wow.
So we're tied to this place, and we might not see it. It's an area of the world that most of us will never get a chance to go to in our lifetimes, but it's with us and it's in us, and we need to protect it for our own well-being as well.
With global warming, we've talked about that a little already, we're seeing the scientists' worst case projections being played out, becoming true very quickly. What's the worst case scenario with deep sea mining? What do scientists say could happen?
So I'll start with what we do know about what the impacts of deep sea mining would be. First of all, if this activity were to proceed on the scale currently planned, it would be the largest mining operation in the history of humankind. Precisely at a time when we know that we need to be moving away from these extractive models because they're not sustainable and they're highly damaging. And so in the context of this really large mining operation, obviously the impacts are not going to be confined to the mining site alone, right? The ocean is a moving, fluid place. The effects will go way beyond the areas that are being mined. So what are we talking about here in terms of actual impacts? Well, the first thing is that there will be species extinctions and therefore significant biodiversity loss. There will also be toxic waste generated by this activity. There are big concerns around the sediment plumes that would be coming up from the collector vehicle on the floor and also being spewed out from the collector ships sitting on the top of the ocean, right? So we've got this kind of dual dust storm, underwater dust storm that's being generated, but would have massive impacts on the entire water column, right? Like full ecosystems coming right up from the bottom up to the top. Of course, there are potential impacts as well on the climate regulatory functions of the deep sea. I mentioned earlier that the deep sea plays a really important role in locking away carbon. So there are big concerns about the impacts that this activity would have on those systems. There's a serious risk that those systems might very well be disturbed and not be operating as they should be. But I think something really important to think about in this context of deep sea mining is that I just talked about what we do know, but there's so much that we don't know as well about the impacts of this activity. And to a great extent, we're kind of going in blind here. There's a massive amount of uncertainty. And one example that I think demonstrates that really well is that here we are on the brink of saying, yes, okay, let's let deep sea mining go ahead. And yet 2 months ago, there was a study by a German research institute that found that some of the metal deposits that they're planning to mine are actually radioactive. So this is an aspect that has not been factored into the discussions around this issue at all until now. So we need to be worried about that and about everything that we don't know about the impacts, as well as what we do know about the impacts.
Your group, the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition, has already had some success in getting countries to sign a ban on ocean mining. How many countries have signed on so far? And how far do you have to go? How far are you planning to go?
Yeah, the all-important question. So we currently have 21 countries in favor of a ban on deep sea mining. So this has actually been a pretty radical shift on the sometimes glacial scale of international politics.
Right.
So this time a year ago, there were 0 countries standing up and saying no to deep sea mining.
That sounds like a success.
Yeah, no, starting to get there. So there's been this big wave of countries coming in and saying no. And every time there is another meeting in Jamaica, there's kind of a wave of countries that comes out in opposition. So we're expecting that trend to continue over the next couple of years as things move forwards. But I think what's going on here is that there are a lot of countries of the world that are currently remaining silent on this issue and sort of waiting to see how it plays out. But it certainly feels like the trend is going against deep sea mining, because even if we look beyond government positions, there's a lot of opposition outside of politics as well, right? Obviously, there's a massive resistance from civil society. We have, several hundred scientists that are standing up and saying, no, this would be a terrible idea. Even from industry, the likes of Volkswagen, Samsung, Google, Microsoft, they've all taken positions against deep sea mining going ahead. And these are the kinds of companies that would ultimately be targeted to be using the minerals that are coming from deep sea mining, right? And yet they're standing up and saying no. In the financial sector, there's big resistance. We recently had the UN High Commissioner come out saying that he is in favor of a ban on deep sea mining. So there's a lot of movement happening, at state level, like among governments, but there's also a lot of movement happening outside of the politics. Really important to keep that in mind as well, because of course, when those politicians are sitting in the room making decisions, they're representing all of us. And they're making decisions on behalf of all of us.
So with all this opposition to the idea, what groups are pushing for deep sea mining?
So there are a number of countries that are looking to move deep sea mining ahead. Norway, for example, has set a precedent by stating recently that they're planning to open up their own territorial waters to deep sea mining. And their extended continental shelf. Obviously, that's a big blow to the nature lovers among us, but it's not a done deal yet. So there's a lot of work happening in country to kind of see where that goes. Otherwise, this push is really coming from industry players that want to make money. So the most aggressive advocate for deep sea mining is a Canadian company called the Metals Company. They have a very smooth sales pitch. They claim that deep sea mining is a viable way to obtain the minerals that are required for the green transition, notably for developing electric vehicle batteries. However, this is a really misleading narrative. because if you look at what's actually going on in that battery tech sector, well, the market is already taking us away from the minerals that are found in the deep sea. So the minerals that are down there, the main minerals targeted are nickel, cobalt, manganese, and copper. But Tesla, for example, is already using a battery model that doesn't use any of those minerals. So there are big questions around the actual demand here.
On the topic of biodiversity, how important is it for species that the public cares about, to be frank, like whales, dolphins, seals, or penguins, to have an undisturbed ocean floor?
Yeah, great question. So it all comes back to this question of connectivity, right? Everything's connected, as I said before. So, of course, the deep sea has a massive impact on the nutrient cycle all through the water column. So, there's a kind of circular dynamic that goes right up from the sea floor up to the surface levels of the ocean that affects the whole food chain of these iconic species like whales, like dolphins, like penguins. But there are some of these species where actually they would be directly affected by mining activities. So whales, for example, are very sensitive to noise and light. And the mining zone that's currently targeted is actually right in the middle of a whale migratory route. So all of the human activity around this area and the noise that it generates and the light that it generates and the toxic waste that it generates, all of this interferes with the communication functions, the feeding functions, hunting functions, mating functions of iconic species such as whales that are very much present in that area.
The ecosystems in the deep ocean are quite alien compared to the terrestrial systems. How long would it take for the seafloor to recover from deep sea mining? Do we have any kind of estimate for that?
We do, and the simple answer is that damage would be irreversible. So a really unique characteristic of deep sea ecosystems is that they are slow to grow, they're slow to move, they're slow to evolve, they're slow to reproduce, which makes them incredibly fragile. So there have been some studies done on this about the capacity of these ecosystems to regenerate. And currently the results are showing that there just would be no regeneration. And so anything that happens down there that interferes with those ecosystems, we have to consider that it's irreversible. Once the damage is done, there's no going back.
That makes the exploitation of those systems even worse from a biological perspective.
Agreed.
Your battle is kind of unique in the history of the environmental movement, since you're advocating for policies before the damage is done. Are you optimistic about your chances?
I am optimistic about our chances because of this massive shift that we've seen. We have gone from this situation where there were no countries standing up against this going ahead to now like a strong group that's championing for a ban on deep sea mining, and then everything else that's happening outside of that group of countries. This is also an issue that was quite obscure for a very long time, was not in the media spotlight, and it wasn't on governments' radars. But suddenly, over the last 2 years, it has been catapulted into the spotlight, and the press is interested, civil society is interested, scientists are interested, industry is interested. So with all of that attention, it's catalyzing the movement, and the trend that we're seeing at the moment is that it is taking us away from deep sea mining going ahead.
What drew you personally to protecting the seafloor? Have you visited the deep seascape?
I wish. I have not. I really hope that I will one day. So what drew me to protecting the deep sea? I've always been drawn to ocean issues, but I also think that this particular issue of deep sea mining is a fascinating one because it's not just about deep sea mining. It's emblematic of something much bigger. It's a symbol of the fact that our societies are sitting at a crossroads where we have to make a decision. Do we continue to take and take and take from our earth until there's nothing left and we've destroyed everything? Or do we start to change our systems because we see that our systems don't work anymore?
There's so many sectors that need to make that kind of transition, and I'm glad to see that someone's at the forefront on the oceans side of it. Well, thank you so much, Emma. How can people follow and support your efforts at the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition?
So you'll find us on social media. We're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, and any support would be most gratefully received. So please tune in. And we also actually have a campaign that anyone can get involved with now. If you go to a website called defendthedeep.org, you have a possibility of just clicking on a button and sending a letter to the policymakers in your country, asking them to support a ban on deep sea mining. So if you are interested in this issue and if you don't want to see deep sea mining go ahead, please visit defendthedeep.org and press the button.
That sounds great. Is there anything last minute you'd like to add for our listeners?
Just thank you so much for your interest, and yeah, we'll keep up the fight. Please join us.
All right. Thank you. Thanks again to Emma Wilson from the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition for that interview. Now a quick message from our patrons and sponsors.
For a Green Future is also brought to you by the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging programming, and they teach people to love and respect nature. They also restore wildlife habitats and lead people on outdoor adventures. Wood County Parks protects natural spaces in Wood County for all to enjoy from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every day of the year. There are several ways to get a hold of them and find out what's happening. One is to call them at 419-353-1897. Another is to visit their website, www.wcparks.org. The website again is www.wcparks.org. They are also available on all social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and many others. Just search for WC Parks. That's the Wood County Park District, and we're very grateful for their support.
And we are also grateful for the support of our patrons. And these are wonderful people who've gone to patreon.com. That's patreon.com. And there they searched for a Green Future. Up popped our show with some cool pictures for the different membership levels. They picked a membership level that matched their budget, or they set their own membership level. You don't have to choose one of the ones that we've got up there. And so now every month a little bit comes out of their account, comes over to us, and we could not be bringing you this show without it. And I just want to take a minute to remind everybody that interviews like the ones we just heard are not the norm for a couple of reasons. One, nonprofits like that have to struggle to get on the air. But two, what we give our guests 15-minute interviews, which is long enough to get into some depth on the topics that they're so passionate about and that are so important to you and me in terms of our health and our continued existence on this planet. So if you want to keep that kind of thing going, if you want people to find out about topics like this, which you're not going to find anywhere else, please consider becoming a patron. Go to patreon.com, search for a green future, pick the budget level that you can afford, and then forget about it. And then just automatically a little bit will come to us every month. All right. Thanks so much for listening.
Okay, Rebecca, your turn at the mic. What do you have for us this week?
All right, so this week in the news, there is something in the southeast part of Ohio used to be called the Wayne National Forest. It was, this is mostly according to WOSU 89.7 NPR article by Allie Vugrinich. I don't know. I'm sorry, Allie. But yeah, it's named after a Revolutionary War general named Anthony Wayne, aka Mad Anthony Wayne, because he was a bad guy to tangle with.
We've got statues of him in Perrysburg, so.
Yeah, he's big in this area. The Native American tribes do not like him because he ethnically cleansed Ohio.
Yeah.
Which is why a
Not
bunch
a
of
great
them now live in Oklahoma and places like that. The Wayne National Forest, which has only been called that for 70 years, by the way. Like before that it was called something else. It was part of some other forest, But it's a patchwork of public forests spanning 250,000 acres of Appalachian foothills in southeast Ohio. So, yeah, it's hard to remember when you're up here in northeast Ohio, glacier country, that part of Ohio is in Appalachia.
Yeah.
Our major geographical feature here is overpass, basically. This is happening because the Secretary of the Interior ordered the removal of all geographical names offensive to native tribes. I don't believe he gave a way to identify or gauge whether they're offensive or not, but at least some of his employees are taking him seriously.
She.
Okay, it's a she.
Deb Holland.
Deb Holland, okay.
Yeah.
Is it a lady? Are you sure? Because they're talking about something called Lee Stewart, forest supervisor.
Oh, that's the director of the National Forest.
Oh, you're right, it is, yeah. Okay, so the U.S. Forest Service has proposed the name the Buckeye National Forest in its place after the state tree Aesclus glabula? Glatua. I am confused.
The state tree.
Yeah, the state tree. It's a buckeye. Which happens to be the soapberry family of trees with lychee fruit trees, and so called because apparently people have been for millennia using them in place of soap because they create lather and get dirt off of you and things.
I'll have to try that.
Yeah, well, not buckeyes. I don't think they do that. Yeah, they've never done it in my experience. But the name's only 70 years old. Lee Stewart, forest supervisor, referred to the natives as, and felt it was warranted because they were the first stewards of the forest, which is pretty much true. And apparently, Ohio natives have been unhappy with the name for years, or native tribes with roots in Ohio, because as I've said, a lot of them were forced westward into places that were not like where they came from and were not very nice. They didn't enjoy as much as they liked living in Ohio. Anthony Wayne's most important battles were in the Revolutionary War were in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. And also in the Northwest Indian War, he fought and won the Battle of Fallen Timbers, which the battlefield is down Maumee. I've never gotten out and looked around it. I think it's just a plaque. I think that's all it is.
There's a couple forts there.
Oh, there's forts. Okay, I should go see the forts sometime. That's nice. So this particular conflict was the U.S. versus the Northwestern Confederacy and Canada, and it led to the, quote, opening of Ohio, which it was open to settlers, which means the people who used to live there had to leave.
Right.
So it seems maybe a tad unfair to some people. This battle happened in 1794. And the Miami tribe of Oklahoma decries Anthony Wayne and this particular battle is a brutal and deadly campaign against their tribe. So, he was playing to win, and he was pretty mean and nasty about it.
Yeah.
And yeah, people fought back, but they were defending their homes. That's a little different from
Yeah.
just.
I mean, on the one hand, obviously Anthony Wayne is not a good historical figure. But on the other hand, the centralization of naming standards in Ohio is so bland that they are returning to like the Buckeye National Forest. They could have shown a greater respect to the native tribes by picking a native name or something.
Good point.
Something
yeah.
not so central to the Ohio naming standard.
Yeah, because if that becomes our fallback, everything's gonna be
Buckeye.
Everything, a lot of stuff, too much stuff already is. It's the Buckeye everything here. Yeah. But yeah, and of course, this has led to these outraged cries that they're destroying history. Dollars to donuts. None of the people making that complaint actually drove by a sign saying Wayne National Forest and was like, oh, I wonder who he was.
That Wayne.
I'm gonna Google it. Where you can still find history, where they actually have much more information than just constipated white guy on a horse, like the statues. In books, that's where in books, even online, there's quite a bit of it out there. Just look up history of random thing. It works, I'm telling you. I've done it. That's how I found out all this stuff. It was not by seeing a sign that said Wayne Forest and suddenly it all came to me.
Yeah, and the people who knew Anthony Wayne's name already have either, their history books have either been whitewashed a little, or they knew him for his nefarious deeds. So.
Right.
Well, thank you, Rebecca. That's a good report on the state of Ohio. The state of the state.
The state, yes.
Of Ohio. Now it's time to take a look at Ohio and beyond with our ecological news segment. First up, we'll be covering a report by emberclimate.org, where Matt Ewan analyzes the energy usage of the European Union across 2023 and compares it to previous years. His findings show some incredible and uplifting trends as they relate to the clean energy transition. Firstly, and most happily, the EU has seen the lowest generation of fossil-fueled energy sources on record, falling 17% between January and June of this year. The general move away from coal and gas-powered outputs account for a large part of this change, with coal power decreasing by almost 25% so far in 2023, and gas decreasing by 13% as compared to last year. However, the largest factor in the fossil fuel fall-off was the 5% drop in total electricity demand. The energy usage of the EU across the first half of 2023 was 1,261 terawatt hours, which is even lower than the 1,271 reported during the middle of the 2020 COVID pandemic. Hopefully, this means that the European Union governments are beginning to understand the scale of the disasters the climate is facing and are committing to more conservative and more energy-efficient policies moving forward. Alongside the falling trends so far demonstrated, the cleaner energy sources continue to grow, with solar, hydro, and wind power generation increasing by 13%, 11%, and 5% respectively, as compared to last year. And of course, individual countries that have already begun to focus their efforts on achieving carbon neutrality are coming even closer to that goal. As of June, Denmark and Portugal are both achieving 75% of their power from renewable sources. So, the success that the EU is having while cutting out dirty power leads us to ask, why is the United States falling behind in this sector? In 2022, 79% of the energy consumption of the U.S. came from fossil fuels, petroleum, natural gas, and coal. Compare that to less than 39% in the EU. It's pretty clear, and has been for a long time, that we just aren't doing enough. It's time to stop allowing the fossil fuel industry to guide our politicians towards positions favorable for destroying the planet. We have the space for solar and wind, and we should use it. This report by emberclimate.org has even more facts and figures than our brief summary. I can recommend giving it a read through yourself if you're interested in how our European neighbors are doing in meeting their climate goals. As a reminder of how high the stakes are in pursuit of a better, cleaner Earth, we have a story from ScienceAlert.com by Carly Casella titled, "Scientists Warn That 1 Billion People on Track to Die from Climate Change." That's billion with a B. This is a review of 180 articles, each covering the human death rate of climate change in an effort to find a definitive estimate. And this figure they've arrived at, 1 billion, is at the low range as to the deaths caused by climate catastrophes across the next century. They use a few assumptions to make a proper assessment. One is the 1,000-ton rule, which posits that one death will be caused by each 1,000 tons of carbon burned. If this is true, at our current levels of carbon emissions, we are condemning more than 36 million people per year to their eventual death by climate disasters. Another figure taken into account is the continually rising global average temperature, in other words, global warming. For each 1/10 of a degree above our current figures, our population could see 100 million deaths. Of course, this is nearly impossible to narrow down to an exact range, but the United Nations has reported that, in the present day, environmental factors play a part of up to 13 million deaths yearly. And, as the science has shown for a very long time, there could be a runaway effect in the near future, meaning there is no better time to encourage better environmental practices than today, right now. As a little thought experiment, Richard Parncutt, the co-author of the original review, considered the effects that the Adani Carmichael coal mine in Australia would have. That is, the largest planned coal mine ever. The yearly output of the largest coal mine ever produces, at a very rough estimate, 25 terawatt-hours yearly, less than 10% of the yearly energy usage of the entire European Union. And that would cause the premature deaths of 3 million people. That is the scale we're talking about here. A tiny fraction of the energy we need as a planet comes at the deferred costs of millions of lives and literally unforeseeable consequences. We must change our ways before it's too late. This is all not even taking into account the resources required to dig up and then ship this coal. You know, sometimes we can end these more pessimistic stories on a happy upturn, but I'm not going to do that this time. When we put aside the abstract calls to help the planet or to save the environment and focus directly on the consequences for the human race, it looks bleak. It sounds radical. It's an inconvenience to society, and especially an inconvenience to the pursuit of money. But you have to hear these numbers. You have to see these facts exactly so you understand the stakes and can make an informed decision on what action to take. This is all going towards that green future. For an example of what you can do with your informed opinion, we have a story local to Ohio. Once again, the Ohio state government has put forth proposals to allow fracking on Ohio public land, especially in parks. SaveOhioParks.org is the central location for information opposing this effort, which started all the way back in May 2011 with House Bill 133. At that time, at the creation of the Oil and Gas Leasing Commission, there was a promise made that Ohio parks would remain natural and not turn industrial. Largely due to public backlash and protests, then-Governor John Kasich did not appoint anyone to the original commission. But don't be surprised when I tell you that Governor Mike DeWine did fill those vacancies, leading to the first meeting of the Leasing Commission in November 2019. Then came House Bill 507 at the end of 2022, with direct dark money ties to the oil and gas industry and with DeWine's direct blessings, which created the process of nominating public land for use in oil and gas extraction by private companies. Immediate public outrage followed that bill. Environmental groups such as the Ohio Environmental Council and the Sierra Club attempted to sue for unconstitutionality, and at every hearing since there have been comments and in-person testimony by members of the public asking for oversight, public notification, environmental protective procedures, anything, any restraints at all on the private companies that would be given carte blanche access to Ohio's public lands. Instead of doing any of that, ignoring all the public outcry, and at the direct request of oil and gas companies, the Commission removed the clause allowing the revocation of a lease already granted. In other words, and in stronger terms, this Commission has no guidelines as to what parcels of public lands is off limits, no authority over the companies it allows to ransack that land, and no reason to deny any leases to any private companies. This commission only exists to throw up the illusion of governmental influence in a rampant display of the power of corruption and oil-tainted money. Many applications for the leasing of public land have already arrived, which includes the entirety of Salt Fork and Wolf Run state parks and the Valley Run and Zepernik wildlife areas. Other parcels around the state are also threatened. So, what can we do about this? SaveOhioParks.org has all the information you need, including ways to email the Commission or your representatives about these issues. The next meeting of the Commission to decide the fate of all of these lease proposals is on September 18th, less than 2 weeks away. Especially with regard to our previous story, now is your chance to let your thoughts be known about environmental issues in your own backyard. There will also be a protest on the day of in Columbus. Finally, as promised, we've got a quick report on radioactive hogs. In Bavaria, in the south of Germany, the wild boars that can be found in the region's forests have had puzzlingly high levels of radiation, such that the country has deemed them unsafe to eat. However, a new study by Environmental Science and Technology magazine has revealed a shocking insight into the problem. Previously, it was theorized that the Chernobyl disaster was the cause of this radiation, but by comparing the ratio of cesium-135 and 137 isotopes, a larger proportion of 137 was discovered, meaning that the contamination was more likely to come from nuclear weapon explosions rather than nuclear reactors. In other words, the nuclear bomb tests of the 1960s produced cesium-137 pollution that is only now displaying itself in the ecosystem, probably through the fungi found at deeper soil levels. Those newly contaminated mushrooms, usually truffles, are eaten by the boars and then are detected by the scientists. This is an incredible snowball effect, and yet another reason that we should avoid the creation of nuclear waste at all costs. The long-term effects of radioactivity are still impossible to determine with any accuracy, and with this unexpected resurfacing of a source of radiation long since thought diffused, well, it's just another reason to worry. Well, there's not much good news this week, but that's okay. Sometimes we have to suffer through the bad in order to get to the best ending, and that's what we're here for at For a Green Future. We'll be trying to get to that good ending right alongside you all. We'll be back next week with a new show and more uplifting stories, but for now, it's Joseph DeMare signing.
I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done.